Thank you for working out the technical difficulties to get on this program.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, man, what an awesome title to a book. We're talking about neuroscience and the search for the soul. Man, that is deep. That fits perfectly with this broadcast because, Doctor, we've been looking for the soul for a long time. Let's just get right to it. Have you found it?
I think we do know pretty much that the soul does exist, and I think we have a pretty good sense anatomically in the brain where that is, yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you what, let's get to our bio intro. Why don't you tell the folks a little bit about your history and a little bit forward then into why you began to research this topic?
Sure. So I'm a neurologist and a clinical neurologist, neuroscientist, and basically been in the biotech world for about 7 years now for a company called Genimind that's actually doing a very large study in Indiana, in fact, for people with depression. So I'm a real, biological reductionist guy. Like I like facts. I mean, I like finding out exactly where in the brain problems come from. And I think that the deeper I dove into that kind of search, the more I realized that as far as we go down that rabbit hole, it doesn't explain a whole lot about the existence of mind or soul.
Mm. Now, have you, and I ask this question myself to a lot of guests, what's the difference between a soul and a spirit? Would you say they're the same thing?
I think they're the same thing. Yes, I think that definition is fairly the same. I think that, in the old days we used to use the word, soul, and then it changed to mind during the period of psychology. And now neuroscientists say that there is no such thing as mind either. So those words have become sort of dirty words in the vernacular of many, many people in science, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, the way this show rolls, Doctor, is that we have people sending questions in. There's two things going on here. One, there's a chat. I don't know if you've looked at our website to notice it on the left side. And so there's a live chat where people are talking about this program as they're watching. And then
beautiful.
So they're talking to each other and they're talking to our moderator too. And she's sending me questions to you. And then, so there won't be a third party online. And then we also have people clicking on what's called a fast blast. Those are direct email inline questions to us. And so let's get right to a question from a Kentucky girl out of the live chat to ask, do you know a Dr. Carolyn Leaf?
I know the name, but I don't know her personally, no.
Okay. And you're probably going to get this question anytime you get on the program. I wouldn't know. But what do you think about cannabis that some claim heals a lot of diseases?
So that's a loaded question, but I do think that there are properties within the cannabis plant that are extremely effective. The issue is really identifying what those are. So the short answer is yes, there are a lot of medicinal benefits of components of the cannabis plant.
All right. Well, Doctor, let's dive deep into this thing now. Okay, so we got a brain now. I read recently that there's a claim that the heart has more direct energy output than the brain. Do you know anything about that? Does that sound right? I always thought the brain was a massive electrical things going on.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, there are a lot of connections between the heart and the brain. And that's actually a very interesting phenomena that when we say we feel things in our heart, the reason is that it's connected to our brains. But as far as how much energy different parts of the body consumes, the brain per pound consumes the largest amount of energy of any part of the body.
Mm-hmm. What's going on in the unused part of the brain?
Nothing. The brain is being completely used. We may not be consciously aware, but it's not as if the brain just shuts down when we're not aware about it. Mm-hmm. Automatic functions like breathing and vision and pupil dilation, all those are things we don't take conscious awareness of.
Mm-hmm. In the bio that we grabbed a bio from, I think we got it from Amazon where your book is located, at least one outlet of it, and it said that there are billions of people from the dawn of time have asked the question, is there of God? Have you come up with a determination yet, or would you like to hint about what you have found?
About if there's a God or not?
If there's
God. How we would explain it? I think that the best way that I would try to understand something that's completely ununderstandable, right? How do we get our heads around an infinite being that we can't really have even any grasp of whatsoever? Is think about something called a Higgs boson, which is also called the God particle. And the God particle drives scientists crazy. The reason why it drives them crazy is because it has no mass. It has no physical attributes. So the question is, how does something that's not physical, can't measure it, how do we know that it exists? And we know that the Higgs boson exists because it has an effect on everything around it. Mm-hmm. So my sense of God is that God is this force that affects everything, and yet we have no ability to quantify it whatsoever.
If we go back in time, and I don't know what your view of evolution is, and for the purposes of this show, we'll probably not get into that very much. But wouldn't in the earliest dawn of man, at some point, if we are just the collection of experiences of sight, sound, the senses, how would one ever be introduced to this extraneous God figure that's interfering with things? How would that even come in to view, to even in the brain and in the mind, to even be a thing?
Well, I think it goes back to understanding that our brains are designed for those experiences. So we have really two brains inside of our heads. We have a left brain that's logical. It relies on language and mathematics and facts. It's very explicit in terms of what it understands. But the right hemisphere of our brain is a whole different reality. It actually grasps things in a more emotional and more comprehensive way than the left hemisphere of the brain. Mm-hmm. And it's been shown that much of religious experience is in fact found in that hemisphere of our brains.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let me put it another way. Let's just say there is a color named colony. There's a color named colony. How would we know that color exists if we've never seen it?
Well, that's what goes back to why people who sometimes call the God particle the goddamn particle, because how do they know it exists? And the way that they know it exists is by the fact, imagine watching a soccer game and you're in space and you're watching players run up and down the field, except you can't see a ball, okay? But everyone's running around that field looking for that ball, kicking the ball, hitting his head. That's kind of the way I think about how God affects us. His force affects us without us ever being able to quantify or have any kind of tangible sense of God.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Let's get to a couple quick questions then. Guest 527 wants to know, where is the soul supposed to be located?
Well, the soul interacts with the brain. Okay. It's not necessarily within the brain. It sort of has its home. But the home is not, you live in your home, but you are not your home. So we know actually that there are certain areas of the brain that the soul functions within. And those areas are very simple to understand, actually. What we call in science autonoetic consciousness, or the ability to tell ourselves stories. Human beings are storytellers. After the show, I'll say I was on a radio with this really good-looking man with a white hat and very good questions, right? That's the story that I'm going to be telling myself after the show. But we all tell stories about our lives, and that's what the seat of the soul actually is in that place called the narrative brain.
Mm-hmm. All right, those previous questions were from our live chat. This question is from our Fast Blast link. Philip from Georgia asked the question: if the soul can be mapped in the brain, then can it be manipulated?
That's an excellent question. Excellent question. Of course the soul could be manipulated, and it is manipulated, right? So that's a very deep question. I think we could do a whole show on how one would even know that, right? But yes, I think that's clearly our souls are both affect the universe and are affected by the universe, both. It's a bi-directional.
Mm-hmm. All right, and then back to the live chat. Kentucky Girl asked the question: the heart-brain connection is used for a complete thought function. Don't ignore your gut reaction. Do you have further info for us about this? I guess the actual question is, where does the gut come into that? The gut feeling, the intuition, women's intuition to say.
Yeah, so these are all great questions. So, I lecture for a group called the Institute for Functional Medicine, or IFM, and what we teach is something called systems biology. What that means is that we understand that every part of the body is interdependent. So the cardiovascular system, the pulmonary system, the digestive system, the brain are not separate systems. They're integrated systems. So of course the gastrointestinal tract plays a vital role in our health. 100%.
Does people that gravitate toward the belief in a existential presence, a God figure, do they typically tend to live better lives, or are they simpler lives and they're oblivious to the reality?
So the research has shown that people who believe in a higher power than themselves, and believe more, not only in a higher power, I should say, they believe in purpose. Because one of the major themes of this book is about the idea of purpose. And many people, when you ask them, say that their life has no purpose, which is, a very depressing thing for people to actually feel or to experience. People who have purpose live longer, they have better health, and they have better quality of life. 100%.
Okay. I have your book in our background now. It says The Mind of God, Neuroscience, Faith, and a Search for the Soul. Man, I like the graphic you have kind of floating up there above that in that book cover there. Just quickly, where can people get that book?
Should be available in every major bookstore, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere. It's available all across the country.
And it also seems like, from what I see in your bio, you've done a lot of maybe interviews yourself. You've talked to a lot of people about what they know, what they felt, and things. Are those stories in that book?
Oh, absolutely.
Have you personally, through your research for this book, do you feel like you've grown, and have you looked at the composition of what you wrote and thought, wow, man, I'm seeing this is awesome. This is a picture developing here. Has it improved your life, or anything like that affected your life?
I love that question. That's probably the best question I've ever gotten on an interview, and the answer is unequivocally yes. The book wasn't written for anybody else. Quite frankly, it was written for myself to ask these questions about, if as a neurologist, can I understand a creator's mind, and really explore, all sorts of resources, whether it was theology or science or metaphysics. And the process tremendously transformed my life. Yes, it has.
Awesome. Here's a question of the live chat. Why do you feel the soul is in the brain? Why not the heart or out of the body?
Well, I think that the soul relates to the brain. It's not localized in the brain. So it is expressed in our brains. And through the expression in our brains, it does affect the heart, and as it affects every other organ system in the body. But we need to understand that the heart is very much metaphorical, related to the right hemisphere of the brain, the emotional center, or the relationship-oriented center of the brain, is the connection between our brains and our heart. So it's where we're really kind of getting caught in semantics when we ask that kind of question, because the soul is part of the brain, but it's not within the brain. It acts upon the brain.
There's a movie, I think it was called 23 Grams. And I think the theory of that movie, what the premise was, that when a person dies, the body inexplicably loses 23 grams of weight. Do you agree with that, or is that just a fluke, or what do you think causes that?
Yeah, that was one of the original anecdotes we had in the book, and our researchers said that was pretty much accounted for, that the explanation of it being sort of the weight of the soul is really not actually, fundamentally sound as a scientific theory.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have this question come out of the Fast Blast. It says, are there differences in the brains between people of different religions?
That's a good question. I don't think that anatomically there's no difference in any human brain. Our brains are structured the same way. I think that the use of our brains is different in different cultures. Even language. So in the ancient Hebrew tradition, language was more oriented from the right hemisphere of the brain. Mm-hmm. But nowadays, most language is from the left hemisphere of the brain. So that's a fundamental difference about how language accesses our brains.
Let me ask you something. The ancient Egyptians, when they captured their enemy, I saw this in a show, they had there's a tool, and that tool goes up the nasal cavity, and it's like a stir stick of some kind. They crank it, okay? It goes right up the nasal, right into the brain. They crank it until forgive me, but for those people with queasy stomachs, okay, but the brain drains out of the nose and they drink that. They believe that they are getting the knowledge and experience of their enemy. With that, were they far from the truth? Were they insane, or did they have a point?
Well, I would say they're probably just as insane as the people did frontal lobotomies back in the 50s, thinking that that would treat depression. So they did the same technique where they would go up the nose and actually extract parts of the frontal lobe in order to make people less aggressive. So there is an anatomical reason. If you destroy the frontal lobes, you will make a person be completely apathetic and without any kind of drive whatsoever. The idea that you could consume the frontal lobes to obtain knowledge is just simply nonsense, to be quite frank.
Okay, but are there not contained within the brain are the memories? And aren't memories stored in the brain? Do they on death, and particularly say a flat line of the brain where there's no brain function at all? Do those memories evaporate, or are they impregnated in the synapse and various sinews of the brain?
Well, if the brain is dead, those synapses are not going to be able to contain any of the memories anymore. So the question really is, what happens to first of all, what is memory, right? So memory is something that we still don't really fully understand. As much as we do research on Alzheimer's disease and conditions like that, we have no idea what thought or mind or memory actually means. But to answer your question, according to my feeling about this, is that when we lose our physical lives, our memories are not destroyed. They are donated and sort of spread across the virtual net of the human consciousness. So that, for instance, right now, my dad and my mom, who both are gone to the next world, are living through me. Their existence and their memories are within my brain. And that's how I think that we are immortal, is through each other, essentially.
So if a computer has lost all power, there remains the images and the data on the hard drive. So say there's a picture and it's on an electrical impulse, an impulse is impregnated on a synapse somewhere, wherever that memory is, that picture is there. You say cutting power, it evaporates and it never was imprinted where it was located? And if so, then doesn't it mean it always had to have a continuous of electrical energy to keep that picture in place? But once you take the energy, the picture dissolves. Is that what you're suggesting?
That's exactly right. Yep, okay. It's a very good analogy. That's exactly what happens. As long as the electricity's on, those memories can exist. Once that electricity goes off, those memories disperse. We don't know where they go, but they're not in the brain anymore at that point.
Is there a point that the brain, when it has scientists and maybe even neurologists discovered when the brain is at its maximum potential? Is there an age?
Well, there is a gradation. So we know, actually, one of the radiologists I work with, who I was doing a case with a couple of weeks ago, was telling us they used to measure blood flow as part of routine, imaging of the brain. Children have about 10 times greater perfusion to the brain than adults do. And that perfusion to the brain is essentially related to why we see such an open-minded, open source in children. As we get older, our minds close, literally and also metaphorically. Mm-hmm. So our brains never close completely, but as we get older, it's more difficult to acquire new information, obviously.
As a person gets older, let's go back to the analogy of a picture that's being powered up. Do older people seem to the power maybe sort of lessens, and so therefore different images begin to disappear, and therefore maybe even to Alzheimer's or just a faded memory? Is that what's happening there? The brain can no longer produce the amount of electrical energy to drive those images?
And Alzheimer's is probably not one disease. It's many different diseases. That is one theory, that it has to do with the electrical amount of activity. There's some great research being done at Johns Hopkins related to that exact type of theory, that you can help to maintain the voltage of the brain with a low dose of certain types of medications. Mm-hmm. But we don't know exactly. We know that the cells of the brain degenerate. So think about, if you go to an archaeological site, let's say where Jesus prayed in the Sea of Galilee, and we know that he was there physically, but all we see now are the remains that were there. It's kind of like what happens when memory is lost. We can see the archaeology and all the remnants of the presence of that events happening in the brain, but we don't see the actual memories itself.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have this question here, and this may be beyond the scope of this interview, but do animals have souls?
Sure, of course they have souls. They have animal souls, which are different than human souls.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we've all witnessed a dog dreaming, and you could tell that he's running after a rabbit. You could just tell,
Right.
And there are demonstrations, and there are countless YouTube videos, as you can imagine, of animals that have emotional responses. Are those emotional responses trained, or is it the fact that they in fact have this soul, which has a sense of moral development to it?
So the animal soul is in many ways pre-programmed, as it is in humans as well. So things like, for instance, being hungry or desiring sex or being thirsty, those desires are essentially, inbred as a spiritual type of energy, of course, but they are in many ways mechanistic. It's only the human soul that actually has a free soul, meaning that you can choose your own freedom or your own will. Mm-hmm. Animals don't have that ability to make those kinds of conscious decisions. That's the difference between an animal soul and a human soul.
Isn't it interesting? As you were speaking there, it just, as a human collective, it just struck me that the Aztecs tried to get the power from their enemies through ripping the heart out while it was still beating. The Egyptians tried to get it from the brain, and the Indians tried to get it from the animal spirits. Isn't that interesting that humans have always sort of sought to get more than what they were designed for? Why is that? What's that proclivity? Where's that come from?
That's such a great question. Well, it comes from really the first chapter of Genesis, right, where Adam and Eve, are tempted by the tree of knowledge. That's what human consciousness is the ability to ask questions, not just accepting blind faith, but to constantly ask questions about the meaning of our existence. That is a spiritually endowed feature that's unique to human consciousness. So we will always, always be trying to extend and elevate our consciousness, always.
And then where does this? They always talk about the hole. They say a hole in the heart that man continually tries to fill, and it fills it through sex, through drugs, through alcohol, for that matter, for endless relationship types of things. Never collection of things, but never able to fill that hole. Is there a hole? And is anything in this world able to fill it to a satisfactory level, or is it destined never to be filled, or is it only a place that God can fill?
Wonderful question. So I think the answer is the last thing you said, that only God can fill it. But the question is, how does God fill it for us? And God fills it through our love for each other. It's through deep, unconditional love that place inside of us gets filled. And that's what the learning experience for my book was about, quite frankly. And that's where the challenge we all have in our life is to find that place and to live in that place as much as we can.
And now, is that something that takes a lifetime, Doctor? Or do you think they're among the higher consciousness of the world? Has anyone ever achieved that? Say, like the great yogi or Gandhi or Jesus, I would say maybe the great philosophers. Has anybody? Is it an impossible task, Doctor? Tell me.
I think that anybody who says they maintain that state on a consistent basis is rare. I think that life is about oscillations between being there and not being there, and the goal is to be there as much as we possibly can. But I think there are people, great spiritual leaders, you mentioned some of them, that really were obtaining that level all the time. And I certainly don't know what that feels like, but I know I've gotten glimpses of it. Mm-hmm. And those glimpses really say to us that this is the right way to live.
I've always put it this way, that it seems that and I'm going to use the term God here, and I don't know how many people are going to be upset with that term, but that seems like God deposits certain things in other individuals, like little chunks of gold or little chunks of truth. And the only way you can ever grow as a person is to develop maybe either a relationship or a communication with that person who may be, in fact, diametrically opposed in every other way of everything that you could possibly believe. But they might just have that little piece. And if you don't, say if you just shove them off as, you don't believe like I do and this and that, you'd never get that little chunk because somewhere in there is a little piece. And what that does, that requires us to be good people, to be more understanding and accepting of their view. Because if we are just long enough, just wait just a little bit longer to what they're saying, we might get that little chunk. And if we don't, if we're in a hurry to condemn and to ostracize and to say, you're not like me, we'll never get that. And maybe it's the people that have learned to do that, to be more accepting. And that doesn't mean, of course, being accepting of an axe murderer, let's just say, I'm throwing it out there. But in general, does that sound like a plausible scenario there?
That's so beautiful. And I would even take it one step further to say that humanity can be considered like a whole being where people play parts that are metaphorically related to vision or to, the U.S. military, to strength in the right arm and the ability to actually use force. There are people who play primarily the role of the heart of the human body. So every single human being plays a role in this, God's body, if you will. And yes, if we reject any part of our body, we have, in medical terms, something called autoimmune injury, which means that the body ends up hurting itself. So what your injunction to recognize that is a profound and very, very important message, to be quite frank.
All right. Let's go to another question for you. Well, I don't know. This seems like half a question. It says, can you see this place in brain... Okay, I got it. I understand. Can you see the place where God resides if you were to do brain surgery?
So some of the original work on looking at the soul came from a neurosurgeon up in Montreal named Penfield. And Penfield was able to actually stimulate different areas of the brain and invoke very specific memories that looked holographic during a surgery. But no, there is no we have to stop thinking that there's a localized specific place that we can, capture the soul in a jar like a, lightning bug. Mm-hmm. We can't do that, but we could see the contours of the soul in that area of the brain that we call the narrative brain. Yes.
Mm-hmm. There are those that say that certain things can actually change our DNA structure, such as, and we're going to go conspiratorial on you, Dr. J, through genetic tampering, through chemtrails, through GMOs. Some people claim that it is literally changing the DNA structure of humans. So I saw this question come in. It said, can the idea that having a religion can that change, or the understanding of the existence of God, can that change the DNA?
It doesn't change the DNA specifically, but it does change the expression of the DNA. It's actually something that is very well studied in psychiatry and also in cancer research. It's called epigenetics. And that means that we can't change the letters of our biological code, the dictionary of human life, but we could change how that script is read, very much so. Mm-hmm. So the answer is that it's a little bit of both.
All right, let's get to this question here. How does psychotropics affect the ability of the soul to function in the mind?
Well, that depends on the psychiatrist, I guess, right? I mean, it's, the medications are not inherently good or bad. When medications are used properly, they are transformational for people with depression. Our company has seen huge benefits for people getting on the right medication. So psychiatric drugs, when they use in a very careful manner, like many of the doctors in Indiana that we've worked with have, it's not a constraining feature for the brain. But there is many times people who are medicating problems that should not be medicated. And I think that the question is not as black or white as I think people want to make it.
It is claimed, and I don't know what the studies, I don't know all the studies, but they say that alcohol kills brain cells. Is that just a euphemism, or what's the truth of that matter?
Well, I think excessive alcoholism kills certain brain cells, mainly in the cerebellum, which is our balance center. So we can see in alcoholics, if a person's worried about over drinking, the first problem you'll see is things like tremors, balance loss, slurring of their words. But yeah, alcohol in excess, it can kill brain cells, but so can anything in excess. So I think we have to be careful about making those kinds of broad statements as well.
Technology seems to be getting closer and closer to tapping into the brain as far as the areas that control functions. And I seems like I've heard the military has the ability to fly planes by thought. Is that technology out there, Doctor, that you've heard of?
Sure, I've worked on it. I mean, there's a lot of research on artificial intelligence, but at the same rate, I think that there are things that the human brain can do that are intangible, that a computer could never do. But at the same token, we are learning a lot more how to augment our brains and how to actually do things like, fly with our thoughts.
Mm-hmm. All right. Here's a question: does the soul have a capacity to grow?
To change? Yes.
To change. That'd be a
Yes.
good way to put it. All right, and then it looks like a follow-up question. Same viewer. How close have we come in mapping the neurons of the brain?
Extremely close. So there's something called the Human Connectome Project, which is mapping all of the connections between the brain. It's not completed yet, but it's a major project across Europe and America. And it was called the Brain Initiative. So we are in the process of mapping the entire brain.
Mm-hmm. What about clairvoyance? How does that fit into the brain? Where does that come from for the brain activity?
So telepathy is something that a famous psychologist named Carl Jung wrote about extensively. And Carl Jung was Sigmund Freud's peer. They broke off because Sigmund Freud was the sort of the premier psychiatrist of his day. But Freud was considered his main focus was about the mind and the interaction of the mind with oneself internally. Whereas Carl Jung was focused on the relationship of our minds with other people. And he wrote about things like synchronicity, telepathy, ESP. And what he really was talking about was that there is a way of our minds communicating that are just non-physical because our minds aren't physical. And I personally, I've had hundreds of experiences in my personal life, hundreds that are essentially telepathic. So, I mean, I'm a materialist, but I have no doubt that the mind is immaterial. No doubt whatsoever.
I had I think it was maybe last week, what I would call a synchronicity swarm. I mean, it was unbelievable. And
That's great.
And it's like, is somebody trying to get my attention? What would be the cause of a synchronicity swarm?
Yes. Well, we got maybe go for a couple of beers after this talk. Keep it moderate so that we don't have to kill any brain cells. But I'd be curious to hear what your synchronicity swarm actually meant. But I can tell you that in my own personal life, I've had dreams about people I've not spoken to in 25 years that call me the next day. So what a synchronicity swarm means is to pay attention to things that we otherwise may not be paying attention to too closely. And it's not as if those signs are not there. It's just that we don't recognize what the value or the interpretation of those signs really are. So given your own circumstances, I mean, I don't know if you want to tell the listener, but there's something very important that happened when you had a synchronicity swarm, for sure.
Is that something that one could train one's brain or one's awareness to increase the knowledge that it is happening? Because it seems that, when you're on your way to Walmart, you're not going to see much, or wait a minute. Now you think you won't see much. I think a Walmart trip is totally wiped off the map of any kind of spiritual, metaphysical activity. But indeed, Doctor, I believe it can be, and we out of hand dismiss it. And that may be one of the biggest supernatural experiences somebody can have if they're aware and they're looking for the synchronicity, or they're looking for a sign of that there's something there.
Every moment of our life is an opportunity to connect to God. every single moment, whether you're in Walmart, you're at home making breakfast for your kids, or you're playing baseball on a professional baseball team. Every single moment is a connection and an opportunity. It really is up for us to open our eyes to those opportunities, because they're always there. We just have our eyes closed. But to answer your question, I think by activating the right hemisphere of our brain, that brain that is more intuitive, more implicit, more heart connected, that's the area of the brain that actually allows us to have more of those synchronicity experiences. If we're completely linear and objective, we just rationalize them and say, this is just, just is meaningless. It's coincidence.
Isn't rationalization the enemy of a connected, fulfilled life? That nothing has, for those that believe nothing is connected, nothing has meaning, things are just the sum of your experiences and nothing else. That sounds like a pretty boring life to me anyway.
Well, I think it's misguided. I think that, out of all of the sciences, biology is synonymous with purpose. There is no difference between the word purpose and the word biology. We cannot exist without purpose. Cells cannot function without communication between their separate systems. The brain can't function without other relationships. So for us to say that there's no purpose is a contradiction. It's simply an oxymoron to make such an assumption.
There's an awesome scene in The Matrix I like to talk about where Agent Smith is telling Neo, he was telling Morpheus when he was in chains, he's saying that when the computer created a perfect world in the mind of man that was in the vat of goo. Okay, are you familiar with The Matrix?
Not am I familiar with it, but now I'm wondering if that green room was by deliberate. So is that because of The Matrix that you have a green background?
No, so that I can put you in the because what they're seeing is all kinds of pictures, man. So that's what the green is. They're not,
sorry about that.
Yeah, they're not seeing green. But I tell you what, though, since we're talking about it, and I don't know if you're watching the show, are you watching the show, or are you just seeing me in the green screen?
I'm just watching you. Yep.
All right. Well, for the viewers, I'm going ahead. I just put us in the Matrix. Okay. So right now there's streams of green data that is obscure in the video, but you and I are still in the pictures. So you and I are in the Matrix right now, what the viewers are seeing. But there's an awesome part of that where the Agent Smith told Morpheus that the computer had generated a perfect world for the humans to live so they could extract the power out of them, but they lost whole crops of humans because their world was perfect. And he said until they introduced pain and woe, that the humans began to flourish. So is it necessary that we have negative experiences to move to a higher sort of plane or understanding of our surroundings and into the synchronistic world and the greater connectivity?
I think, unfortunately, up to the current time, the answer is yes, that we've had to experience trauma to learn from trauma. For instance, tomorrow is the anniversary of my father's death. My father's death is what propelled me to become a neuroscientist and a neurologist. But really? when he died when I was 18, I certainly did not understand the meaning of his death at that time.
Do you have meaning now?
Of course. 100%.
Have you felt like you ever been communicated to from the other side?
Through my dad directly. In fact, I write about that in the book, The Mind of God, where I would have dreams about him periodically, in which I would find him in an abandoned warehouse. And I was so depressed and upset that, I'd left him there by himself for as many years. And in the last dream I had about him, which I wrote about as well, not only did I discover him, but I actually took him out of the warehouse and I carried him on my shoulders. And I said, Dad, I'm taking you home now. And he was, crying. He was still emaciated, but he was so happy that I had found him in this warehouse. And that dream was such a recurring dream. It was so profound that I have no doubt that is the source of how we connect to our deceased loved ones, is through our dreaming.
All right. Listen, we're Dr. J, we're at the top of the hour, and I'm going to put your book right into our background right now. There it is, The Mind of God. Tell people how they can get it and maybe about your website before we go to our 5-minute break.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much. So the website is drjlombard.com, JAYLOMBARD.com. But the book should be available at any Barnes & Noble, Amazon, any major bookseller should carry the book. I've gotten people who photographed it, all across the country, and it's also being published in Europe and South Korea, and some other countries as well. So we're really grateful to Random House. They've done a great job helping me, and I believe it's an important book. I'll be very honest. I think it's an important book for us to read.
Okay. All right. We're going to take you out of the picture so you can take a break yourself and just don't log off the Skype. We'll be back in 5 minutes. So we'll be back in 5 minutes with you, Doctor.
You got it. I'm going to grab some water. Thank you.
All right. All right, everybody. You're watching and/or listening to the Edge Television broadcast. My name is Daniel Ott. This show will begin to replay in the main player directly after the program. We'll put it up in our YouTube channel and podcast it and put it into our TuneIn radio programming archive. We're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll be right back. All right. And welcome back to the Edge Television broadcast. My name is Daniel Ott. If you've missed any of the exciting first hour of this program, it'll begin to replay in our main player directly after the show in its entirety, and we'll extract the high-definition video. We'll put it up in our YouTube channel. We'll also podcast it and put it into our TuneIn Radio playlist. The Edge TuneIn Radio station playlist plays all of our shows continuously across any platform, any device. Don't forget to come here next week. We'll have a debate between Bill Bean and Kevin Schrum about the Mandela effect. Do not miss that. Spam everybody in your contact list. They must be a member of the Edge audience. Spock, do you understand? Do you understand? Let's go back to our newsmaker line and welcome back Dr. J. Lombard. Doctor, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Great show.
All right, man. Glad to have you on, man. We're going to go deep into the bowels of the brain. I was thinking in the first hour, I want to come back with this. We started hitting on that a little bit, and you mentioned dreams. Where do dreams occur in the brain?
They basically occur throughout the entire brain. REM sleep looks electrically just like wakefulness. So while you're dreaming, the only difference between dreaming and the wake state is that the muscles are paralyzed so that you don't run or hit your wife over the head with a hammer when you're dreaming about her. Mm-hmm. But so sleep looks very much physiologically like the waking state for all intents and purposes, mm-hmm. with a couple of different modifications to ensure that we are sleeping.
Mm-hmm. Is there technology that can project dreams into our brains? Or for that matter, thoughts?
Not directly, or thoughts, not directly, but we can. There has been work, very scary work actually. I was one of the medical advisors for the remake of The Manchurian Candidate, which is with Denzel Washington, and it was all about the idea of manipulating the brains. That was based upon pretty sound research, where if you put electrodes in people's brains, you can get them to do a lot of things that they otherwise would not want to do. And the way that you do that is by stimulating areas of the brain that are significantly reinforcing, so that the pleasure a person experiences from an event is so addicting that they keep doing it over and over again, even if they don't want to. Mm-hmm. And that's also the theory of addiction.
I've had this question that I would like to ask. That is, when a dream is formulated, does there not have to be a director, something formulating a picture into a movie? What's responsible for that amalgamation, the directing, the script of the dream?
So according to a lot of early research from Freud, it was the unconscious. So it's essentially memories that are not formulated in a linear or left brain way. And think about dreaming. Dreaming, there's generally no real time sequences in dreams. An hour could feel like 2 seconds, or you could go from something that, things that don't make any logical reasoning in the wakeful state occur without us questioning it at all in the brain state. So it's almost as if the brain is allowing itself to take a peer into what I call unmitigated experience that's not been essentially whitewashed so that the executive brain could feel, oh, this is a great product you put out here for me. Nope, it's an uncensored experience of our consciousness.
I had a dream. Let's do some dream interpretation, Dr. J. I had this lucid dream. I guess. Well, for one thing, is that the correct term? Lucid dream. Does that mean what's the difference between a lucid dream and a regular dream?
A lucid dream is when a person not only is aware that they're dreaming, but is able to actually assert some authority over the sequence of the dream. So there are people who've actually perfected this ability to have lucid dreaming, and as a result have really increased their consciousness by sort of controlling the events. But a lucid dream is the word that maybe people refer to generally is more of a vivid dream. That's not the same thing as a lucid dream.
Okay, well, I put this in the category of a vivid dream. I had a dream last night. There was a killer on a train, and I knew I was the only one that knew the killer was on the train. And there were federal authorities outside the train that was looking for the killer. And I said, hey, the killer's in that train right there. And so they were kind of appreciative of that. They were going to go board the train to get him. And I thought, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to smoke him out. So I took some device like a Molotov cocktail, and I threw it on the train, and it exploded in fire. Turned out that the killer had already disembarked the train, and he knew that I'd report him. He was after me. What do I do with the dream like that?
So, Joseph in the Bible made a lot of money interpreting people's dreams, right? So I would have to know a little bit more about the circumstances of your life, but I would say that overall, the significance of a dream like that is about, first of all, your desire and activation of doing good in the world. That the way that you think about your life and your purpose of your life is to not only to do good, but to also eradicate evil. So, finding somebody that's a bad person who's about to do harm and getting to the right authorities is actually wish fulfillment, right? Your ability to actually be successful in that pursuit. What happened, unfortunately, in your dream is that something blocked the completion of that, so that person that you were looking to actually get arrested was able to avoid the law enforcement, not only that, but to come at you. So I would say that the second explanation for that is that there are issues that you've not resolved within yourself that have prevented you from completing that ability to find that person and have them be sort of taken care of, if you will.
Now, I'm wondering, maybe there's a psychology then, as you said, that in the first sort of interpretation, that I want to do good. And perhaps that's the psychology of why I wear a white Stetson instead of a black one. See,
there you go.
Maybe that I think you may have nailed it. I think I like the first one. Then I like it as a cowboy that I am. And you might question, wait a minute, are there cowboys in the Midwest? Well, my cowboy really only on the show.
Hey, I have a great idea for your producer. We should do a dream interpretation show. People should call in and let's interpret their dreams.
I love it. Hey, I tell you what, people in the live chat watching the show, throw a quick little dream in there. Keep it short, man. We'll feed it to the good doctor. All right, let's get to this question here from King's daughter. It says, what kind of dream is it when you feel awake, pinned in bed, and you cannot move or scream out? And I think a lot of people have had that type of dream where you're like stuck and you can't move. Paralysis.
That's actually a neurological condition called sleep paralysis. And sleep paralysis can sometimes be associated with a medical condition called narcolepsy. Now, not every person who experiences sleep paralysis has narcolepsy, but narcoleptics can have sleep paralysis. So it's important for a person like that, if they have sudden urges to fall asleep, or if they fall asleep when they're crying or laughing, or if they have other associated symptoms, that is a medical problem. So it's common, but it's something that people need to pay attention to, being possibly an underlying condition.
I saw in the live chat reading through there while I think in the first hour, somebody said that they were raped by a demon. Is that a mind? Is that the mind, or is there a possibility that such things occur?
Well, I had a patient I wrote about in the book that believed that, and she had what was called the dissociative personality disorder. She developed two personalities, and she would actually embody the demon, as she called it, and would be this very, very frightening personality that when she came out of it was this very meek, soft-spoken, polite woman. And there's been a lot of research on this type of condition of dissociation, where people actually believe, that they've been possessed or have a demon in them. I don't think that we should take that literally, but I don't think we should neglect the significance of that either, because very often people who've had those kinds of experiences have been traumatized in real life as well.
I have your book back in our background again, The Mind of God, Neuroscience, Faith, and the Search for the Soul. Doctor, in that book, or maybe not documented in that book, but in your studies of different situations, have you come across any near-death experiences?
In my own personal life or in patients?
Patients or your life or any.
So I've had patients who discuss near-death experiences quite frequently, and they're all very similar in that there's a transformation after the experience of the near-death event. There's been a lot of research on the physiology of near-death events, including projecting images, being able to see things from above yourself. They've not been able to really substantiate whether those are in fact true or imaginary experiences, to be honest. But I think that what happens in near-death experiences is that a lot of life is compressed. Remember, time and space are creations of the mind. They're creations of our minds. If we don't have an experience of time or space, there is no time or space. So that's, another whole conversation, but that may be why people have near-death experiences. They've compressed time and space.
Well, Doctor, there are those, and speaking of time, there are those that claim there is a phenomenon known as missing time. Is that where we actually separate, where the box that the brain puts us in, and maybe moved outside of that where there is no time? Is that like a glimpse of the other side?
There's lots of reasons for that happening, including some neurological reasons. There's something that's a very interesting disorder called transient global amnesia. People actually can lose a whole day, where when you see them, they can't retain any new memories at all. And then within the next day, they're totally fine, but have no recollection of that day. And the reason that occurs is that the brain is it's receiving data, but none of it is being stored in the brain. So that may be a different phenomenon than what we're discussing.
So there must be parts of the brain that you said earlier. I mean, when we kind of opened up, you said that the brain is being used at 100%. I've forever heard people say that only 10% of the brain is being used, and that perhaps in human history, back in the day, that more was used. So are you saying that we're at the height of what the brain can do? There's nothing more?
No, I would say that we're only conscious and aware of a very small percentage of our brains. 90 or more percent of our brain occurs behind a firewall. Digestive activity, the secretion of hormones that affect a woman's menstrual cycles, those are not under conscious control. Those are essentially behind this curtain, if you will. My concern personally is as we end up, outsourcing lots of brain functions, like directions, for instance, through GPS. Over time, we will lose the ability to follow directions. And as we outsource language or outsource other behavioral functions to technology, what that'll do is we'll use less of the brain. We're not going to use more of the brain. Our brains will be shrinking in the process. So technology is not necessarily such a great thing. People go, we're going to open up our brains. Technology very much could be the tools of oppression for a fully open mind.
Well, I know I'm oppressed every time I get a text from somebody I don't want to get a text from. That's kind of oppression. But hey, and speaking of that, and I saw the question came in through the fast blast, had to do with the cell phone, which is our evolutionary appendage. Now, I guess one would say, right? And there are those that claim that it causes brain cancer. What's your view on that?
I think the data is very spurious. I think that they've looked at, a lot of data. I think that, unfortunately, some of the data on brain cancer and cell phone usage was sponsored by phone companies. So there you go, how much we should believe that. But I think that prudence is a better part of valor. I think that we should keep cell phones away from children in general up to a certain age. We should try to avoid, holding phones directly to our heads. But I think that the risk is if it's there, is only in a certain percentage of people.
What'd you say?
Yeah, so I gotta. Yeah, so don't use hold the cell phone too close to your head.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks for calling. Uh,
You're welcome.
no. What about the long term effect of the brain? Is it just me now? Now I'm obviously, I'm just now turned 29. I've been 29 for like 10 years. But anyway, is there a generation coming up? Isn't their brain going to be altered by the constant stimulation of technology? What's going to the evolutionary process of technology and the brain in the next 10 years with kids like 3 years old now have cell phones or tablets? It's crazy. What's going to happen to them, Doc?
It's a great question. There's actually a very strong theory that one of the primary evolutionary reasons for autism is that as our technology ends up subserving a lot of functions that our brains normally do without the technology, that we're seeing generations of children who are more adept to function in a digital society that are autistic-like or Asperger-like, so that this behavioral feature of autism and Asperger's is due to the rapid evolution of digital technologies. And I actually, as a neurologist, believe that is true.
All right. We have a question to this. What about people who start speaking suddenly in a different language after a traumatic experience? How does that occur?
Well, there's what's called the dissociative phenomena. When people experience either trauma or very positive experiences, this is when our brains are closest to experience the truth. What I mean by truth is that the left brain, the logical, rational brain, shuts off, and the larger experiential brain turns on. And by the way, just as a side note, all cultures carry infants on the left side of their bodies. And the reason that they do that is so that the right field of vision, the right hemisphere of the brain, is able to emotionally connect with the child. So I think that these experiences where people have trauma and have all sorts of epiphanies or sudden changes in their personality, or suddenly they believe in God, these are all due to the fact that they're activating an area of our brain that's normally quiescent, and we're not in touch with that area of the brain.
This is really crazy. Years ago, there was a show called In Living Color with the Wayans. Have you ever seen that or heard of it?
Of course.
Okay. That show would never go today. It was right. So politically incorrect, but I just got to say this, and I'm not making a comment on lifestyles, but there was Men's on Film, and what happened was, and there were two gay guys there, and they always analyze movies. Well, a stage light came down and hit one and knocked him straight, and so the other guy, he saw that. And then he took a brick and tried to hit him in the head to knock him back gay. It was just, so I don't know, man. So traumatic events can happen. It was documented in The Living Color. All right, let's get to this. Next week, Doctor, we're having a classic edge battle debate on whether or not a phenomenon known as the Mandela effect is in fact real. Are you familiar with the Mandela effect, and do you have any view on that?
What is the Mandela? I think I know what it is, but explain to me, please.
Well, it's one of the latest internet rages. Okay, people are saying that Mandela. It started with Nelson Mandela. People claimed that he died years ago, but then he just got re-died. He re-died and got buried here recently. And they're saying there was a time warp, that somebody is messing with time, and so there are these little anomalies that are happening, such as the classic one that people say that if you go to YouTube now and you pull up Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He doesn't say it's a wonderful day in the neighborhood. He says it's a wonderful day in this neighborhood. Everybody remembers him saying and now it says this. So there's this ongoing internet battle rage going on that the Mandela effect is changing words in a book, films, the title of the Fruit Loops, how Fruit Loops is spelled. It's kind of the rage. That's what's going on.
So my original take on this is that what we're seeing is essentially an erosion of trust of our collective memories. And that's a very scary phenomenon, to be honest with you. So I think that we in the past have trusted our collective memories through religious beliefs, through community, through our rituals, through our, family legacies. And we talk about these kinds of conspiracies of history being changed. What we're really saying is we're really afraid that, that the history is being rewritten and it's not being rewritten by us. That's where I think the fear of that Mandela effect actually is occurring.
Yeah, that's just seemed to be the one before that was whether or not the Earth was flat. So I'm really not sure, but we're going to find out. In fact, I see in the live chat people are putting they're putting Mandela things in the live chat right now as we speak. All right, here's a question. It says, "Is it true we retain 80% of what we see as opposed to 20% of what we hear?"
Seeing is believing. It is the strongest sense that we have that confirms what is real, which is why, we have a hard time seeing God or believing in God, because we want to actually confirm that God exists with our vision. But we can see God, but we just have to know how to look for God. Mm-hmm. So God's right in front of our eyes every second, but we don't realize that. Mm-hmm. But the note is true. Vision is definitely a stronger sense for belief than hearing this.
I think one of the Mandela claims lately is if you watch a rerun of the Flintstones are driving a Cadillac now, and they used to drive an open cart with stone wheels. So I'm not sure how that fits in there, but that might be part of it. People's lack of trust in the Flintstones, it's gone to a pretty scary level. Doctor, I'm with you on that there. Here's a question. It says, what about we've already asked that question. Got to remove that one. What about multiple personalities? Where does that come from?
So that's very similar to the previous question, which is that when children experience severe trauma, their brains check out, they leave, and they create an alternative reality that allows them to adapt to a situation that otherwise is completely non-survivable. So almost every multiple personality disorder patient that I've ever seen, or in the literature, always has some child history of either extreme physical, sexual, or psychological trauma to the point where they dissociate.
Speaking of children, it seems to be claimed over the years that I've heard that children see invisible people until the adults talk them out of it. Is it that their perception that there really are such people that are invisible, say to adults, because we have civilized our surroundings and they haven't yet?
No, I think it's because the imagination is real. I once took my daughter to a Blue Man Group show, and she was like 4 years old, and she got very scared. I had to take her out because it was a pretty intense show for a 4-year-old. And I said, Sophia, it's imaginary. I said, do you know what that means? And she said, yes. I go, what is it? She goes, imagination is when the mind becomes real. So that, I think, was a great observation. And when children see friends who are, ghost-like, it's their imagination becoming real. So I don't think there's any contradiction. And
there's a one sentence line that's been embedded or impregnated into our culture, and that is, "I see dead people." Okay, that was a child that said that. But I tell you what, when it comes to children, what the kind of children you don't want to see is children of the corn. So we're going to leave them over there. If you see them, let's get out of here. But there is another phenomenon, if we want to go that route a little bit. There's something called black-eyed children. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Oh man, you gotta have to get in the internet, man.
I gotta go to Indiana.
There you go. There's something called the dark web, and I think that's where it's coming from. And I think we've asked this question already. It says, how does modern electronics and social media, well, maybe not, maybe clarify there, social media affect the brain? Is it causing memory loss? Is it causing desensitization? Is it causing anger and changes in our physiology?
Yes, all of the above. The concern I have about how interconnected we are is that, the internet is a neutral phenomena. Technology is neutral. It's not good or evil. It just is what it is. But humankind can use technology for good or evil. When we use technology like the internet and social networks to proliferate hate and bias and prejudice against other races or other people, that is evil. And not only is it evil, but it will spread in ways that previously we did not have the ability to spread such hatred. That's my biggest concern about. Yeah,
that's well said there. But there's good and bad. You said it is neutral. But let me ask you, when technology arrives to universal AI, would it not determine that humans are a plague on the earth?
So when God in the Bible either destroys the earth, like in the times of Noah, all the prophets have to say to him, look, it's not that bad. There are still people on the earth that's worth saving for. So clearly, your question is a question that I think God looks down at our planet and must ask that same question. Hopefully, people like you, keep him from destroying the planet, because unfortunately, humankind, it's still not clear if this is a good experiment or a bad experiment, quite frankly.
All right. Here's a great question that came in. It says, is it theoretically possible to transfer the soul of a dying person into another person's body?
No.
And is there a wall? Is there a technological wall, an organic wall there? Is there something that's built in to make sure that never happens? A line is never crossed?
The soul is not biological. The soul is energy, and we can measure the energy, we can see the energy, but we can't necessarily harness it to the point we can contain it and transfer it to somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Seems like Google made the claim they would be able to within 17 years. So I don't know. And, I don't think I want Google controlling the world. They're trying to do it now. And, I mean, things are so bad now, doctor, that Amazon now owns Whole Foods. So I don't know where we're going with that. That sounds like the end of the world for me, because I liked Whole Foods and, I try to eat Whole Foods. I don't think I want, Amazon in control of that. They're too big.
Right.
They're going to contaminate.
Airlines are worse.
That's right. All right. Hey, we've got a question. Speaking of minds, does mankind have a collective soul?
Yes. Great question. And that goes back to your observation earlier about finding the value of each person in the world. Because if we think about this as a collective soul, we're all different parts of that collective soul. And, it's like the body. Mm-hmm. The body does not work if you have a disease in one organ, especially the brain.
The Indians once said that life is like a web, and what you do to the web, you do to yourself.
Absolutely.
Yep. I just don't think that people can hate and get away with it. It always seems to me when somebody projects hate, they're the person that's projecting it is the object of their own hate. It doesn't really. It's not a thing that affects somebody. It creates internal turmoil and probably even sickness within the person that projects it.
That's right. I think one of the most profound quotes that I think Jesus ever said was that, why don't we recognize that the mote that we see in our brother's eye is our own mote? Mm-hmm. I think that's we just need to understand that when we go through life.
We talk about memory, dreams and memories in the first hour. You said that they were based on electrical impulses as long as the electrical energy is there. If a person is at a near-death time, energy begins to fade away. What if artificial electricity was introduced into the brain? Would that keep those memories alive?
I don't think that we know the answer to that question. I think that we're beginning to use different types of electrical and magnetic stimulation, either exogenously or even deep in the brain, for conditions like Parkinson's disease, epilepsy, and depression. So we are learning how to modulate energy through a physician, whether it's a neurosurgeon or a psychiatrist, to alter the electricity of the brain. But in terms of near-death experiences, almost like defibrillating the brain, if you will, I don't think that's been tried. It's an interesting suggestion. I don't know what that would look like, but to my knowledge, it's not been tried.
Okay. All right, Dr. J. Lombard, have you ever heard, and can you define the neural net?
The neural net. Well, the neural net, to me is very similar to what we talked about, the human soul and the idea that there's one body of God, and the neural net is the connectivity of our minds with each other. We are all connected, and that's why experiences like synchronicity or telepathy are so common, because we are connected in a way that's much deeper than our biology. And it's just the people who are more sensitive to that are able to actually understand and recognize its validity.
Have you ever seen any psychokinesis?
What do you mean by psychokinesis?
Isn't that, I'm not an expert, and probably being a cowboy, I probably got the wrong term, but where you can manipulate matter with the mind.
I've never seen that myself personally. I actually had lunch once with David Blaine. He does a lot of, I don't know if you know the magician David Blaine does a lot of really amazingly insane things that just seem not humanly possible. But no, I've not personally experienced, that phenomena. I have experienced the effect of prayer on patients, where people have actually changed as a result of receiving prayer. And I think that would be an example of telekinesis, even though it's, not as direct as moving a physical object.
How would you define how a prayer would work clinically? Is there a clinical explanation that you can even remotely apply to that? Does it affect the?
I think we need to understand that prayer is not for God. Prayer is for us. God gave us prayer for us. I think prayer changes ourselves. We think that God, if you don't pray to God, that God's going to be upset at us. But the reality is that the prayer is an opportunity for self-judgment and self-reflection. So when we pray, we're really thinking about the meaning of our lives.
But what about that? It sounds like you're describing prayer for ourselves. But what happens when you pray for somebody else? Say, and you mentioned the Bible several times. There's a statement that says something like, if you lay hands on the sick, they shall recover. And maybe if it says pray for one another so that you both may be healed. Is there a transference of, say, dare I say, positive energy through prayer or the laying on of hands that creates a healing possibility?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you something, so I've been out of practice for about 7 years. I just went back into practice several months ago. And there's a former retired veteran of the Navy SEALs, beautiful person, love him, who had major traumatic brain injury and had, just nothing worked, no medication, nothing. And I just worked with my hands with him. And he got up and he was like, this is an unbelievable, I've never felt this good in years of my life. So this idea of laying of hands, especially with intent, if a healer is actually putting their hands on a person's head or their body with pure intent, I think that there's a tremendous, profound transfer of energy in that regard.
And I might get this word wrong, but again, I'm a cowboy, so I can do it. I can mispronounce things. But in Kirlian photography, are you familiar with that? Where somebody took a leaf and cut a piece of leaf off, and when they took a picture of it, the outline of the missing part was still there. And I think they did that with hands, where a missing finger, and the missing finger showed up in that. But there seemed to be an aura or energy field around that captured by the Kirlian photography. So could that be where that transfer has come from? That energy is going in?
Sure. I mean, I've seen auras in people, and there's no explanation for what that means, but we are emitting energy. The human body is an energetic unit. So energy is being emitted from our bodies at all times. And we have sensory phenomena that we use, hearing each other's voice modulation or eye contact or just palpating a person, where we're able to actually absorb that energy.
Isn't there a statement that says that energy can never be destroyed? It can only be changed?
That's right.
Am I thinking right on that? All right. Now that would go into a sort of an eternal type of thing. All right. Here's a question that came in, maybe beyond the scope of this interview again. But it says, how can we block CIA MK ultra transmissions?
CIMK.
CIA, from the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. There's something called MK ultra. Doctor, you haven't spent enough time late at night going to the dark web. I can see that. We're going to have to send you some links, man. But yeah, people claim that the CIA is projecting transmissions into people's brains and thereby altering their thoughts, I guess.
Well, I would say to that listener or reader that unfortunately it's not only any organized body. Madison Avenue is doing the same thing for millions of people by manipulating, our buying tastes. Why do we love cars so much? And why do we love eating at certain restaurants over others? So the idea of that we're manipulating other people's minds essentially is called propaganda. And we find propaganda in advertising. We find propaganda in almost everything that we do in life. but I don't think it's as insidious as the CIA trying to change American thoughts, especially. The CIA is doing a great job keeping us safe, so I'm not worried that they're manipulating my mind.
One of the questions that's in your bio on our website there says, "What's the meaning of existence? Are we free?" Can you give us a little something on that, Doctor?
So I think that the issue is that if we're not free, if we have no freedom of decision, then everything we're talking about is completely irrelevant. So all the questions we're asking about, whether there's exogenous mind control, or does God exist, or what is good and evil, or what are demons, what is telepathy, all those questions essentially are the same question, which is, does the human mind have freedom? Because if it doesn't, those questions would not matter, right? And I think all the fear we have about being controlled, all the fear we have about, understanding if God exists or not, all of our questions about the meaning of trauma and pain are all based upon the fact that we're free to choose and to interpret what those things actually mean. And that's the location of the soul in terms of its function. We started this program talking about the seat of the soul being in this narrator brain, the part of the brain that tells stories to itself. The brain is a master storyteller, and we all tell stories about our lives. And obviously, your listening audience, which is quite experienced and wide, have a lot of stories about their lives. And I would really recommend that they read this book so they can understand, A, why those stories are created, B, that the stories are true, and they're true because they created those stories to be true. Mm-hmm. That they did that with their own brains.
Mm-hmm. Here's a great question that came in. It says, what is happening to the brain during hypnosis?
Hypnosis is the ability to shut off that left hemisphere of the brain, the sort of doubting, skeptical, logical, rational brain, and allowing to let go of control of behavior or thoughts, so that someone else can help to instill positive behavior in you.
But what part of the brain is being altered there? Isn't there messages going in there and they're being accepted somehow?
So the messages, it's sort of complicated, but there's something called the autonomic nervous system, which is normally not under conscious control. Mm-hmm. So our breathing, our heart rate, pupil dilation, these things react autonomically. And hypnosis is very effective at being able to alter that type of autonomic behavior.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's get to another question. Is there a difference between faith and the soul?
No, I think faith and the soul are very much co-partners, if you will. Mm-hmm. Right? Again, let's go back to the fact that neuroscientists and scientists in general believe that our existence is completely material. That if you break down, the brain, all it is just neurons and flesh and, electrical circuits and synapses, and that there's nothing that's non-quantifiable in there. Mm-hmm. Faith is the idea that there's something beyond our biology, there's something beyond our materialism, and soul is essentially a concept that coincides with faith.
Can you give us a prime example of how that one may come to the idea that God exists? In your research, did you say a personal testimony story or a patient that you go, wow, you know what? What's happening here is evidence that there is a God. The God exists. Do you have any stories like that?
How much time do we have?
We got about 25 minutes at least.
Well, I can help answer that question for myself. I could tell you that the opportunity to see God has been given to me at times only when I'm egoless, meaning that I'm not thinking about that this is from me, mm-hmm. Or that it's about me in some way. And I'm talking not just for myself, but for the general listening audience as well. Mm-hmm. We're able to see God when we let go of our ego and just focus on other being, everything but the self. Mm-hmm. And when we do that, God appears very, very quickly. That I can guarantee. Mm-hmm. When we remove our I from our own purpose and look at the other.
In your communications with patients or friends or strangers for that matter, have you been able to move them from a sort of a atheistic point of view to a more encompassing, universal, eternal type of view of the presence of God?
So I didn't set out to try to do that. I actually set out for people to understand that, it's a very simple formula, which is that if we are searching for meaning, we will create meaning. If we're not searching for meaning, then we're not going to find it. So that if people just don't, it doesn't matter. Some people it doesn't matter to. Like these questions don't even matter to them at all. So they're not going to buy the book. But what's so interesting is that people who are religious of any religion, what I found very rewarding, whether a person's a Catholic or a Baptist or an Orthodox Jew or a Reformed Jew or an agnostic, that they find very consistent structure of thought about faith, regardless of what their specific religion is.
This question, I'm going to probably mispronounce this word. It says, how can we repair an enlarged amygdala part of the brain?
Amygdala.
Okay, very good. How can we repair it?
Well, how do you repair an enlarged amygdala is like a pretty complicated question for a radio show, but I have to explain A, what the amygdala is, and B, why is it enlarged? So I don't think that I can probably go there to answer that question right now.
Okay. And here's another question. It says, are you aware that there is a phenomenon called subliminal messaging? And then some people claim subliminal messages are coming through our television, through commercials, and maybe even through the programming we watch. What's going on there?
It's a very similar theme in this program. So the idea that, whether it's hypnosis or the CIA or subliminal seduction for advertising or whatever it is, it's the idea that our brains are influenced in ways that we're not conscious of. And I think if people are afraid of that happening, they really should think about that they have a choice to be able to be controlling their own destiny. I think people who fall back and say that they're being controlled by somebody else, whether it's a government or their spouse, really don't want to take responsibility for the fact that they are controlling their own lives.
Well, that just opened the door for me to move in with this question, Doctor. What about alien abduction? Is this based on that fear set of thinking?
Yes, it is, of course. Same phenomenon.
And how do we explain cattle mutilation, Doctor?
That's another one I haven't heard about before.
Oh, man. I'm going to have to give you some links, man, some really good stuff on the internet, because all truth is on the internet,
Yes, I'm sure it is.
Just saying.
I'll tell you, bring me back with all these conspiracy claims. I'll debate anybody you want. How's
okay.
that?
Sounds like you do good on that. Hey, we have debates on here. We're having one next week. So, hey, we'll find somebody who believes the opposite, that believes things are going on. Somebody says here, what do you think about the implantation of a chip to control our health?
Well, there are different types of chips that are even used clinically right now that can monitor blood sugar and secrete insulin. There are defibrillators for the heart. So it's a very general question, but sure, that technology is very available right now.
What would you consider the most spiritual event of your life?
Wow.
Take a moment. Take a moment. If you're just joining us tonight, we have on our Newsmaker line Dr. J. Lombard as he reaches back into the bowels of his brain to recall an experience that he was not ready to talk about right now. Okay, doctor, time's up. Now, see, it's easy for me to ask that question, because if I was asked that question, I'd be saying, let me think.
Yeah.
But you've had spiritual experiences, right?
Sure.
What is this? What is a spiritual experience? Is it connecting with something larger? Is it where we should be? And can we connect to that more? Is it just random events that we can never prepare for? They happen spontaneously.
I think that there's a saying that when the pupil is ready, the teacher appears. So I think that these experiences of spirituality that occur when we're ready for them. But I could tell you that just, I could think of a whole host of experiences that were very spiritually meaningful for me.
Mm-hmm.
The most recent one was that about a year ago, I went through a very severe depression, personal depression about my life. It's, a longer story than I want to actually talk about, but very good friend of mine who's a psychiatrist offered to see me without, just as a courtesy. And I was sitting in his office, and he said, "Have you ever read Beethoven's letter to his brother when he lost his hearing?" And he goes, "I want you to go home and read this letter." And the letter was when Beethoven realized that his deafness was irrevocable. He was the greatest composer of all time that was going deaf. And he had to come to grips with the fact that even though he was to create the greatest music in the world, he himself couldn't hear it. And when I read that, I broke down, because I felt like that, what an incredible humility to be able, an honor to be able to share a gift like that and still not be able to hear it yourself. So that was a very spiritual experience for me, because we don't really necessarily as physicians always get to see the fruits of our teachings.
Where do we go when we die?
Where do we go when we die? We go into a immaterial existence, and we actually have probably a certain time frame in which our minds realize that they're no longer connected to our bodies. And the longer that they stay like that, the more we experience what you want to say is hell. And when we're able to
I don't want to experience that, Doc. I'm going to say the hell away from hell.
You asked the question. Hell is separation. Hell is separation from God. That's what hell is.
Sounds like it would be. Back to the near-death experiences, they always seem to claim that, and you mentioned separation of the soul from the body, that people go through a tunnel. Are you getting that? What is that? Typically they all say the same thing. They go through a tunnel and there's a light at the end of the tunnel. What's going on with that? Is that a collective?
I think they're actually seeing electrical discharges in the brain that are creating, activation of the occipital cortex, which is the visual cortex. But, it still doesn't explain what the experience means. Even if we can describe it, why do we have that experience? Not only can we describe the physiology experience, what is the reason that the human brain has that experience at all? That to me is a more fundamental question.
Some people claim that the humans have something called a third eye. I don't know whether that is an intuitive part that they say that we have, but is that something to do with the pineal gland? Is that something that we can exercise to be more perceptive of things going on? Or are we given a limited amount of perception that way?
The third eye corresponds to the corpus callosum, which is the curtain between the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere of the brain. And a true integrated brain system is one in which information from the left brain and the right brain correspond with each other. So that would be the third eye, is the ability to not be wholly irrational, always spiritual, always emotional, always out there in the sort of nebulous world of immaterialism. But at the other side of the extreme is very often we live our lives in complete materialism without any access to the spiritual world. The third eye, in my opinion, is that the corpus callosum, this divider, allows the integration of two separate but very fundamental aspects of human experience.
Then there's a claim of using drugs like peyote gives one a better awareness of what's going on in maybe another dimension. When somebody takes drugs, psychotropic drugs like that, is that just their imagination, drug-fueled something, or are they really opening up a part of the brain that is closed off and can only be opened by such said drugs?
There are a lot of respectable scientists who've looked at this question using not only peyote but mescaline and other psychotropic drugs beginning in the 1960s. My concern as a neurologist is that it's not that these are necessarily should be outlawed absolutely, but I think they need to be done under medical guidance, because a person who would take these drugs for an alternative experience without having it properly supervised is very, very dangerous. But the flip side of that is that in ancient cultures like the American Indian culture, where it was devised specifically as a spiritual experience to guide that person through whatever that experience was very profound in terms of education and evolution of the person's behavior and their minds.
Mm-hmm. A couple things as we get to the close of this interview, Doctor. What would you like to say to our Edge viewing audience about maybe something that you've learned in life? Maybe something that you would find at the end of your book. Something that you would want to tell them, that something you've learned or experienced, maybe a direction, an encouragement of how they should be or what path they should follow, something on the lines of maybe being a better person in general. Do you have any sort of wisdom for us on that? Something you've learned.
What I've learned is that we're all a part of God. Every human being is a part of God. And if we look at each other as being different or separate or antagonists or, at each other's, throats, then we will not experience God. And conversely, if we're able to understand and get past that veil, we will experience God. But that's really a personal challenge that everybody has. And it really requires us to get our ego out of the way so that we can see each other as God.
Okay. All right, Doctor, we are at the end of the interview. I appreciate you coming on the Edge Television broadcast. We'll put links of this interview on our website. Tell the folks about your website and about your book again one more time.
Sure. Thank you so much. So it's drjlombard.com. It has, you can, order the book from Amazon or Barnes & Noble. There's lots of stuff about my research in pediatric brain cancer and other areas of research that I'm involved with. Mm-hmm. I am a scientist and a neurologist first and foremost. This book was really a labor of love for me, but I want to thank you especially, and God bless you for giving me the opportunity to talk to your listeners. And I genuinely think that they will enjoy the book and will find it something of value for their explorations, looking for meaning and for God in their lives.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Doctor, coming in cold to this broadcast you've never been on before, what did you think about the format?
I enjoyed it very much. Would like to know more about the show. I didn't do any history or background about it, but I found
risky.
that
that was risky.
Questions.
Okay. All right. Well, Dr. J. Lombard, I appreciate you coming on the Edge Television broadcast. Can we have you on again sometime?
I would love to come back down. If you want to have me, I'll be on anytime you want.
Okay. All right. We'll chat later, and I appreciate you coming on the show, sir.
Likewise. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye. All right, everybody. That was Dr. J. Lombard talking about neuroscience and the search for the soul. Don't forget to come back here next week. We're going to have a classic Edge battle between Kevin Ashram and Bill Bean. Going to be discussing whether or not the Mandela effect is real. See if we can get some closure on that issue. Does it exist or doesn't it? Or maybe just a little bit. It does, it doesn't. If we haven't had a guest on the program you'd like to see, drop me a line at edgeam.com, at yahoo.com. And don't forget, you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is Daniel Ott for The Edge. Bye-bye.